It breaks my heart. She can never be a mother. She wanted that so bad. And I know Brian wanted to be a father so bad, and they had so much to offer. They just were two of the nicest, trustworthy people. Their kids would have been perfect.
Picture a perfect morning, the kind where the sun shines through the trees, birds are singing, and the world feels peaceful. But in a small town nestled in the heart of Pennsylvania, this tranquility was about to be shattered. Inside this house, a man's life was brutally cut short. Gunshots echoed the ruins, leaving him struggling for each breath. His wife, hearing the commotion, rushed out of the bedroom, only to be met with a sight of unimaginable horror. A shadowy figure stood in the living room, a gun in hand. More shots pierced the quiet morning, and as the sun rose, the house fell silent. The only evidence of the violence that had transpired were two lifeless bodies lying side by side, concealed beneath a blanket. There were no signs of a break-in, no ransacked rooms, nothing was stolen. It was as if someone had meticulously planned this horrific scene, leaving no trace behind. This is the story of a chilling double homicide that shook a peaceful community to its core. A story of a killer hiding in plain sight, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Stay with us as we unravel the twisted path that led to this tragic morning and uncover the identity of the person responsible for shattering the peace in Graham, Pennsylvania. To understand this senseless tragedy, we need to step back and get to know Brian and Beverly, the couple whose lives were so cruelly stolen. Their story began not amidst the darkness of this crime, but in the vibrant light of a warm spring evening in 2001. They were both college students, their paths crossing at a mutual friend's party. An undeniable connection sparked between them, a shared energy and zest for life that quickly blossomed into love. Beverly was a force of nature, a talented athlete who excelled in baseball and track. She had a natural musical ability, playing the guitar with an ease that many envied, and her knack for languages hinted at a sharp, inquisitive mind. But more than her talents, it was her warmth and infectious smile that drew people to her. She lit up every room she walked into, leaving a trail of laughter and joy in her wake. Brian, on the other hand, was a thrill-seeker, always pushing boundaries and embracing challenges. Whether it was scaling a sheer rock face, diving into the depths of the ocean, or riding the waves on his surfboard, he lived life on his own terms, fearlessly chasing adventure. His adventurous spirit and zest for life were infectious. Together, they were a perfect match, their differences complementing each other beautifully. They shared a wanderlust, a desire to explore the world and experience all it had to offer. After graduating, they embarked on a journey together, saving every penny to build their dream life. In 2006, they exchanged vows in a breathtaking seaside ceremony, surrounded by the love and joy of their family and friends. Their honeymoon was an adventure in itself, a whirlwind tour of several countries before they finally returned home to start their new chapter. They found their perfect haven in the quiet town of Graham, Pennsylvania. A beautiful house nestled near a river and a dense forest, it was the ideal place to lay down roots and build a future. Brian continued his work as an engineer, while Beverly pursued her passion for translation and furthered her education. They quickly became beloved members of the Graham community, their kindness and warmth touching the lives of everyone they met. They embraced their peaceful new life, building a home filled with love, laughter, and the promise of a bright future. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. Their idyllic life was tragically cut short, their dreams and aspirations shattered in a single, violent morning. The question that now hung heavy in the air was not just who had committed this heinous crime, but why? What could have possibly driven someone to take the lives of two such vibrant, loving individuals? Stay with us as we delve deeper into this mystery, exploring the events leading up to that fateful morning, and following the investigators as they raced to uncover the truth behind this senseless tragedy. As the sun began its ascent on that fateful November morning, it wasn't just the birds that were stirring in Graham, Pennsylvania. Brian's longtime friend Stephen arrived at the house, eager to embark on a planned fishing trip. He knocked on the door, expecting a cheerful greeting, but was met with an unsettling silence. No sounds of movement, no voices, just an eerie stillness that sent a shiver down his spine. Assuming his friends had overslept, he waited patiently, But as the minutes ticked by, a growing unease began to gnaw at him. He tried the doorknob, hoping to simply rouse them from their slumber, but the door was locked. He peered through the windows, trying to catch a glimpse of movement inside, but the house remained shrouded in an unsettling darkness. He circled the property, his concern escalating with each step. A knot of confusion tightened in his stomach when he spotted Brian and Beverly's car parked in the garage. If they were home, why weren't they answering? Driven by a mounting sense of dread, he approached the living room window, cupping his hands around his eyes to peer inside. The dim light made it difficult to discern anything clearly, but what he saw sent a wave of panic washing over him. Two figures lay motionless on the floor, partially covered by a blanket. The television was overturned, a silent testament to some unseen struggle. The scene was unmistakably grim, a nightmare unfolding before his eyes. Panic surged through him as he fumbled for his phone, his hands trembling as he dialed 911. His voice shook as he reported the horrifying scene to the dispatcher, his words punctuated by gasps of disbelief and fear. Stephen's call pierced the tranquility of the morning, summoning the wail of approaching sirens. The peaceful facade of Graham, Pennsylvania, was shattered, replaced by the harsh reality of a brutal crime. As the first responders arrived, the gravity of the situation became chillingly clear. This wasn't just a quiet morning gone wrong. It was a tragedy that would forever scar the community and leave a haunting question lingering in the air. Who could have committed such a horrific act? Stay with us as we delve deeper into the investigation, following the twists and turns as the authorities race to uncover the truth behind this gruesome discovery. The idyllic town of Graham, Pennsylvania, will never be the same, and the search for justice is only just beginning. I know this was a heavy one, but these stories need to be told. If you're feeling it, give this video a thumbs up and share it to spread awareness. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and join our true crime community. For those of you who've been here a while, you know I appreciate you. Thanks for sticking around. Crossing the threshold of that house, investigators stepped into a scene that would forever be etched into their memories. The idyllic exterior belied the horrors that lay within, a stark contrast between the peaceful morning and the brutal reality that had unfolded inside. The front door stood ajar, unlocked, with no signs of forced entry. This immediately raised suspicions, suggesting a chilling possibility that Brian and Beverly may have known their attacker, that they had willingly opened their door to the person who would end their lives. Brian and Beverly lay lifeless amidst the wreckage of their home, each bearing the marks of 3 gunshot wounds. The precision of the shots spoke of a deliberate and experienced attacker, someone who knew how to handle a firearm and had intended to kill. But the scene wasn't just one of cold-blooded execution. There were signs of a struggle, of panic, of a desperate attempt to cover up the heinous act. The bodies had been moved, and there were clumsy attempts to clean up the blood, suggesting a perpetrator who had lost control in the heat of the moment, but then tried to regain some semblance of order. 6 spent shell casings littered the scene, each one a silent testament to the violence that had transpired. The fact that they all came from the same firearm pointed to a single assailant, a lone wolf who had invaded the sanctity of this home and shattered the lives within. Behind the couch, a chilling discovery awaited the investigators, a broom with dried blood on its bristles, the handle meticulously wiped clean. It was a stark reminder of the killer's efforts to erase their presence, to leave no trace of their identity. The overturned television, the bloodstains on the walls and floor, the blanket hastily thrown over the bodies, each element painted a gruesome picture of the events that had transpired. But perhaps the most poignant symbol of the brutality of this crime was the blood-soaked blanket itself, a stark reminder of the lives that had been so cruelly extinguished. As the investigators meticulously documented the scene, the weight of the tragedy settled upon them. This wasn't just a crime scene, it was a shattered home, a testament to the fragility of life and the darkness that can lurk within seemingly ordinary individuals. The question that now hung heavy in the air was not just who had committed this heinous crime, but why? What could have possibly driven someone to invade this peaceful home and inflict such violence upon its occupants? Amidst the chaos of the crime scene, a small detail emerged, a clue that held the potential to crack the case wide open, a boot print. Not a bloodstain, but a subtle impression left on the blanket covering the victims. It was a faint trace, easily overlooked, but to the trained eyes of the investigators, it was a beacon of hope. Forensic analysis revealed that the boot print was not just any ordinary footprint. It was from a rare model of heavy-duty work boots, the kind worn by construction workers and tradesmen. This was a significant break in the case, narrowing down the potential suspects to those who had access to such specialized footwear. The investigators meticulously traced the origin of the boot print, following a trail that led them to a construction company in Clearfield County. This company had recently purchased several pairs of these rare boots, further narrowing down the pool of potential suspects to the employees who had access to them. The tension in the investigation ratcheted up a notch as the focus shifted to the construction company. The investigators began the painstaking process of interviewing employees, scrutinizing their alibis, and examining their footwear for any sign of a match to the boot print found at the crime scene. Each interview, each alibi checked, each boot examined brought them closer to the truth, closer to unmasking the perpetrator of this heinous crime. The boot print, once a faint impression on a blood-soaked blanket, was now a guiding light, illuminating the path towards justice. As the investigation into the double homicide gained momentum, the initial focus fell on Stephen, the friend who had discovered the bodies. He had been at the house twice that day, placing him squarely within the timeline of the crime, making him a person of interest. Stephen, still reeling from the shock of his gruesome discovery, found himself under intense scrutiny. Detectives questioned him relentlessly, probing his every move, every word, every expression. He maintained his innocence, claiming he had been fishing alone all day, but without an alibi to corroborate his story, suspicion lingered. He recounted his movements that day, the details of his fishing trip, the frustration of the unanswered calls, and knocks, the growing unease that had ultimately led him to the horrifying scene inside the house. His account was detailed, emotional, but ultimately lacking in concrete evidence to support his claims. However, the investigators were thorough, leaving no stone unturned in their pursuit of the truth. They reviewed traffic camera footage, meticulously tracing Stephen's movements throughout the day. And indeed, the footage corroborated his story, placing him at the fishing spot during the critical hours when the crime likely occurred. Further forensic testing provided even more conclusive evidence of his innocence. His fingerprints didn't match any found at the crime scene, and there was no trace of gunshot residue on him, indicating he hadn't fired a weapon. The boot print at the crime scene, a crucial piece of evidence, didn't match his shoes either, and he had no connection to the construction company that had supplied the boots. With the mounting evidence pointing towards his innocence, Stephen was finally cleared of any suspicion. The investigation had seemingly hit a wall, back to square one. The killer remained at large, their identity shrouded in mystery, while the small town of Graham, Pennsylvania, grappled with the shock and grief of the brutal murders. The case was far from solved, and the investigators knew they had a long road ahead. They had ruled out one suspect, but the question remained, who had the motive and the means to commit such a heinous crime? The search for answers continued, the pursuit of justice relentless, as the shadow of the murders loomed over the once peaceful community. As the investigation continued, a new lead emerged, a whisper of suspicion that cast a shadow over a seemingly ordinary neighbor. Beverly's mother, her heart heavy with grief, revealed a troubling conversation she had with her daughter months before the murders. Beverly had expressed concerns about a neighbor, Jeremy Flint, a young man who made her feel uneasy. There was something about him, something in his demeanor, that set off alarm bells in her mind. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but she felt a sense of foreboding, a premonition that something wasn't right. Jeremy was known in the neighborhood for his suspicious activities. Whispers of drug dealing and shady connections swirled around him, painting a picture of a troubled individual with a penchant for trouble. He had a history of causing disturbances, of pushing boundaries, of making those around him feel uncomfortable. More ominously, he had even made chilling threats towards Brian and Beverly after a confrontation. The details of the confrontation remained unclear, but the threats were real, a menacing shadow cast over the couple's once peaceful existence. With this new information, Jeremy quickly became a person of interest in the investigation. He was brought in for questioning, his alibi scrutinized, his every move examined under a microscope. But as the investigators dug deeper, they uncovered a surprising twist. It turned out that Jeremy had been out of town when the murders occurred. His alibi was airtight, confirmed by multiple witnesses who placed him miles away from the crime scene. He had no connection to the construction company, and the boot print at the scene didn't match his shoes. Once again, forensic evidence cleared the suspect. His fingerprints weren't found at the crime scene, and he had no connection to the murder weapon. The investigators were back to square one, the mystery deepening with each passing day. The focus shifted away from Jeremy, the cloud of suspicion lifting, but the questions lingered. Was he truly innocent, or was he a master manipulator who had managed to outsmart the investigators? The truth remained elusive, hidden beneath layers of deception and uncertainty. The case was far from solved, the killer still at large. The investigators had followed a promising lead, only to find themselves back where they started. But they were not deterred. They knew that somewhere out there the answers were waiting to be found, the pieces of the puzzle waiting to be assembled. With the trail growing cold, investigators turned their attention back to Daniel Tavares, the neighbor who had reported seeing the white pickup truck on the morning of the murders. He had been cooperative at first, providing a seemingly helpful description of the vehicle and its occupants. But as the investigation progressed, something about his story didn't quite add up. His initial statement had been vague, lacking in detail, but now, weeks after the crime, he suddenly claimed to remember specific details about the perpetrator's appearance. He described their clothing, their build, even a scar on one of their faces. This sudden clarity seemed suspicious, especially given the limited visibility from his window at that early hour. To test the veracity of his claims, investigators revisited the scene, examining the view from Daniel's window. It became evident that his new details were simply not possible. The distance, the angle, the dim light of dawn, all of these factors made it highly unlikely that he could have seen what he now claimed to remember. This inconsistency raised red flags, prompting the investigators to dig deeper into Daniel's background. What they uncovered was a disturbing pattern of behavior, a history of crime and violence that painted a very different picture of this seemingly ordinary neighbor. A background check revealed a criminal record, a conviction for killing his own mother, and a diagnosis of schizophrenia. This was a man who had a history of instability, of violent tendencies, of a troubled past that had been hidden beneath a veneer of normalcy. But the most shocking discovery was yet to come. A clerical error had erased Daniel's fingerprints from the system, making him a ghost in the eyes of the law. This meant that even if his fingerprints were found at the crime scene, they wouldn't be flagged in the database, effectively giving him a free pass. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place, suspicion mounting against Daniel with each new revelation. His changing story, his disturbing past, his invisibility to the system, it all pointed towards a dark secret lurking beneath the surface. The investigators were now on high alert, their focus narrowing in on Daniel Tavares. Was this seemingly ordinary neighbor the perpetrator they had been searching for all along? The tension was palpable, the stakes higher than ever, as the investigation entered a critical new phase. The truth is closer than ever, but the path to justice is fraught with danger and uncertainty. The mystery of who killed Brian and Beverly is about to unravel, and the consequences will be far-reaching. With suspicions mounting, investigators devised a plan to get closer to the truth. Under the guise of seeking his help with composite sketches of the potential suspects, they invited Daniel back to the police station. Eager to appear cooperative, he agreed, unaware that he was walking into a carefully orchestrated trap. As Daniel meticulously worked on the sketches, an officer casually entered the room and asked to take his fingerprints. It was presented as a routine procedure, a mere formality to eliminate him from the suspect pool. After a moment of hesitation, Daniel acquiesced, confident that his prints wouldn't be found at the crime scene. The investigators, however, had a crucial piece of information up their sleeves. They casually mentioned the bloody handprint found at the crime scene, a detail that had been kept from the public. Daniel's reaction was immediate and undeniable. His demeanor shifted, his eyes darting nervously, his composure faltering. When confronted with this evidence, the mask finally slipped. Daniel, realizing the walls were closing in, confessed to the murders. He recounted the events with a chilling detachment, his words devoid of remorse, revealing a deeply disturbed individual. He described how he had gone to Brian and Beverly's house in the early hours of the morning, demanding money that he believed was owed to him. When Brian refused, an argument ensued, quickly escalating into violence. In a fit of rage, Daniel had pulled out his gun and shot Brian, then Beverly as she rushed to her husband's aid. The confession sent shockwaves through the investigation. The seemingly ordinary neighbor, the helpful witness, was in fact the cold-blooded killer. His wife, Jennifer, was also implicated, having helped him clean up the crime scene in a desperate attempt to cover up his heinous act. With the truth finally revealed, justice was swift. Daniel and Jennifer were arrested and charged with the murders of Brian and Beverly. Their trial was a media spectacle. The small town of Graham, Pennsylvania, captivated by the unraveling of this shocking crime. In the end, Daniel was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, his freedom forfeited for the brutal murders he had committed. Jennifer, who had played a lesser role in the crime, received a lighter sentence, but her life was forever tainted by her association with the killer. The case of Brian and Beverly's murder was seemingly closed, justice seemingly served. But as we'll soon discover, the story doesn't end there. The dark secrets of Daniel Tavares were far from fully revealed, and the true extent of his depravity would soon come to light, casting a long shadow over the community he had terrorized. Years passed, and the horrific murders of Brian and Beverly Mock faded into the background, a tragic memory etched into the collective consciousness of Graham, Pennsylvania. But the story didn't end there. In a chilling turn of events, the dark secrets of Daniel Tavares resurfaced, revealing the true extent of his depravity. New homeowners had purchased Daniel's former residence, the house where he had once lived with his mother. As they embarked on renovations, they made a gruesome discovery that sent shockwaves through the community: human remains buried in the backyard. The idyllic facade of the house, now a place of new beginnings, was shattered, replaced by the grim reality of a hidden past. Forensic teams descended upon the property, meticulously excavating the remains. The identification process was painstaking, but eventually the truth emerged. The remains were identified as those of a young woman who had gone missing in 1990, a neighbor who had vanished without a trace. The investigation revealed a chilling connection between the missing woman and Daniel Tavares. She had been a neighbor, someone he had known, someone he had been interested in. But when she rejected his advances, his response was not one of acceptance or moving on, but of brutal violence. He had murdered her, then buried her body in his own backyard, a secret hidden for years beneath the surface. This discovery solidified the image of Daniel Tavares as a predator, a man who had evaded justice for far too long. He had not only murdered Brian and Beverly, but he had also taken the life of another innocent victim, her fate unknown until this shocking revelation. The community was left reeling, the sense of betrayal and horror palpable. Daniel, already serving a life sentence for the murders of Brian and Beverly, now faced a second life sentence for this newly uncovered crime. His true nature was exposed, his mask of normalcy stripped away, revealing the monster that had lurked beneath. The justice system had finally caught up with him, but the scars he left on the community would linger for years to come. The chilling case of Brian and Beverly Mock, now intertwined with the tragic fate of a missing woman, serves as a stark reminder that monsters can hide in plain sight. Sometimes the most unassuming individuals can harbor the darkest secrets, their true nature concealed behind a facade of normalcy. It is a reminder to be vigilant, to trust our instincts, and to never underestimate the capacity for evil that can reside within the human heart. The story of Brian and Beverly is a tragedy, a tale of lives cut short by senseless violence. But it is also a story of resilience, of a community coming together to seek justice and healing. And in the end, it is a story of truth prevailing, of the darkness being brought to light, no matter how deeply it may be buried.